Good evening and welcome back to the shop here in beautiful dark Canterbury. Tonight we're going to talk about adding a little pizzazz to your legs. No, not your sorry spindly legs. Real table legs. These table legs that are part of a simple tapered table. So we're going to go from this plain Jane to this glamorous Gam. Well, let's get into it. I've shared with you some higher style furniture before that uses this kind of termination at the foot. More of a contemporary version of an 18th century card table or console table, but it has a nice turned tapered leg and it ends in an ebony foot. So this is actually a solid ebony foot, and this is an extension of the leg. I don't have my demo model, but this piece of mahogany is actually turned with a tenon on the end, and this piece of ebony had a hole bored into the end, and then it was turned on that as that hole was used as a jam chuck in the lathe. So it spun on that concentrically so that when this foot went on, it was true. Anyway, so all that's to say is this is a different wood. This is ebony attached to a mahogany. It's not painted or anything. It's actual wood. So there is a joint in there though, but this is a more formal piece. Let me show you another one. This is a little lower state, and many of you might recognize this. This was the topic of one of our, well, several, I think, Shop Nightline sessions where I shared with you the techniques of veneering an otherwise plano table and giving it a real wow factor. And I'm telling you, this zebra wood really is extraordinary. And we combined the zebra wood with ebony lines, and we did, what I want you to see is this ebony cuffed foot. So this is veneer. So we veneered, we skinned over a solid leg with veneer, and then we cut and continued with an ebony foot. I want to show you the same kind of treatment, but into a solid leg. We won't have any veneer up here. It's not going to be like all veneer all the way. So we are actually going to use a similar technique in some ways, but different in others. So this, by the way, this is a nice little table, and look at, we did some, I think it's pretty nice book match, or what do they call it, quarter match. But there's my border of the zebra wood and ebony lines in as well, and quilted curly maple in through there. So here we go. We're going to bring up the table. This is a very simple unglued up tapered table, just like the one I showed you. It's the same dimension, but it's not been skinned over with veneer. However, I would like to put those little cuff feet on here, just retain the cherry with the cuff feet, much like the example I showed you. So we're going to go from this plain cherry leg to cuffed feet all around. Now, instead of going with the ebony, I've got, this is Macassar ebony. So Macassar is different from Gaboon in that Macassar has this stripy, usually this cream color along with the black, and it comes in all kind of variation. This is also Macassar. This is much closer to Gaboon, and then the Gaboon is the jet black ebony that you see on piano keys. So, and also that's what I used for that foot on that turned table. This makes a nice accent. And when I'm going to use Gaboon ebony in place of, when I'm going to use Macassar instead of Gaboon, I usually try to find it really tight lined like this so that it appears close to black. And that's what we did on the other. However, for this project, this little demo, we're going into cherry, and that's a pretty strong contrast. I don't mind it, but it's black onto the cherry, which we know will get kind of that reddish brown over time. So I thought it would be nice to have a contrast, but not quite so stark. And we're going to achieve that with this material, this sweet material. I haven't used much. I was given a bunch of what some people might call scraps, but this is the good stuff. This is Brazilian rosewood. Oh. Unavailable now. You really, it's a protected species, so it had to predate whenever the restriction went in for it to be sold. And this older man that I met in a town not far away, he did a lot of veneer work and shipped it to New York City, and he was a great guy. I got that zebra wood from him as well, but he had a bunch of this. So I have this, and I'm going to use some pieces to make our cuff foot out of genuine Brazilian rosewood. So that's kind of a treat. And I'll just be using a smaller piece to show you how I'm going to cut it and cuff it on there. All right, so that's going to give us this contrast. This is the Brazilian rosewood on cherry. And I'll wet that at the end just to show you how it looks. But that's what I like about this, is it's closer to the color family of the cherry. Yes. So this is a technique that I've seen some other members of the New Hampshire Furniture Masters use well. Who stands out in my mind is Garrett Hack. Some of you may know he's done very light tapered legs, and very often he would put those little cuff feet, especially in his earlier work. Then he got getting fancy with metal feet and all kinds of crazy stuff. But you can see a lot of different makers' work if you go on to FurnitureMasters.org and then get linked to websites and all that. All right, so here we are. We've got our solid leg, and we want to add this cuff of veneer. So, you could actually add a solid foot, and I've seen people do that, but you've got the challenge of joining a solid piece end to end with a regular leg. So you have to plan that out before you even taper your leg and cut it. And you'd have to have some sort of tenon going in there, similar to how I used on that table. It just seems like too much trouble for a square leg to use a solid cuff foot, and it's a little. It seems like it could be a little weak or compromised because of the way you have to join it together. Not easy to align it, because you're going to have to cut it straight and then get that tenon to seat and have a nice tight shoulder. Why go through that trouble when you can get the same beautiful effect with veneer? Okay, so that's what I want to show you, is using veneer tonight. So here we have veneer. Veneer is 1/42 of an inch thick. I meant to get the thousands.
0.0238. That's
okay, let's call it 24. But here's what we have to do. We have to cut a recess of the thickness of this veneer into the leg with a nice crisp shoulder all around, so we can veneer that on, okay? So we want to lay that out here, and we'll go ahead and do that. Let's start by laying it out, and then we'll talk about cutting the recess. So we want to sharply cut the shoulder first. We only have to make a shallow cut, because we'll only be removing 24 thousandths of an inch. But let's take our marking knife, and I'll just use a marking knife. You want something good and sharp for this. And here's my leg. This is the outside corner. So I'm going to just come up 3.5. I've already got this square set to 3.5, and I'm just going to make a little cut mark right here. Boom. Now I'm going to come over and use the square and set it right in that cut mark and bring my square up. I'll take my marking knife with the flat side against the square. I'm going to go 4 strikes because I'm trying to actually cut the depth that I need. Now I'll flip it, and I'm working from that outside square corner, and we're going to set the knife right into the previous slot and bring the square up to it. And then we can knife again. See how easy that is to get a nice, crisp, accurate line across the corner? How many is that, 3 or 4? Okay, that's good. Now I want to roll onto the inside. Now this is my tapered corner here. So I want to reference off the outside of the leg that's still square, so I don't make a funky line that doesn't match up as I come around this whole leg. And again, I'm going to set the knife right into the line and then bring my square up to it. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. And in French it is. Just kidding. Get the camera lady speaking her French. All right, we're going to go into the slot again. And this is where you hope that it lines up with the other side. And it seems to be in line, especially when you're not using any tricks or mirrors. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right? So we got a nice continuous cut right around. Now we just need to remove that material. Now, you could take a router, couldn't you? You could. You could take a router and set this down and try routing that face. But you've got a skinny piece of wood there, and it's going to want to fall and do some weird stuff to you. You could do it, but you'd have to, because it's tapered, it's hard to put outriggers and get everything lined up. So this is really one that's optimal for cutting that recess on the router table. So what you want to do is take a piece of scrap material. This is just a piece of cherry I had around, and we would make some cuts on the router table. And let me get a piece of veneer here. Let's head on over to the router table, and I'm going to show you how we make this cut. In the table right now, we have a straight, actually it's a dovetail cutter, but I don't care. I like the dovetail because of the shearing action you get when you're trying to cut like a flat bottom. I actually like that I get that shearing, but I'm not using that. I'm just using the flatness of the bottom of the cut. So I raised that bit up, and I did some test cuts before you got here. See these recesses on this leg? So if I bring this up, a piece of veneer, I want to bring it up and feel for when it feels dead flush. That feels really good right there, okay? But let's just go ahead and show you how I did that. I'm going to just raise it until I get it where I want it. Okay, that feels really good and flush. All right, now I'm going to be feeding this into the bit blind. I mean, I can see the bit, but I can't see where it's cutting on my piece because my piece is going to be laying over top. So I can't really see where it is in relation to this line. So what I did was I just held a straight edge up to the bit like this and struck a line across. So here's the apex of that circular bit. It's sweeping around, and I know that it's going to be cutting right to there. So this line, I'm going to be watching when I advance the foot. I don't want to bring my cut line beyond that line, because I'll know that I'll be too far on the opposite side, okay? So I'm gonna just come up about a 1/16 shy and move it side to side, and we're gonna flip all 4 sides so we can create our recess. All right, let's go. All right, so let's get the chisel. I'm just gonna grab a 3/4 inch chisel, and look at all we have to do here. Hopefully my knife cut is deep enough. But if I come in here and I'm just gonna shear, just wiggle it. I've got it flat on the stock, wiggle it a little, and it pops right off. All right, so back here, I'm gonna be holding that chisel flat and just work it. This one I left a little more. And
You're just mentioning the idea of using a joiner to remove the material. Is that, you ever thought of that?
yeah, you could use a joiner as well. Exactly. That would work fine. But again, you're going to be stopping, and you'll have the round cutter. Plus, you can't get quite as close with a joiner because of the size of the cutter. But you can see on that, with that action we just used, how quickly we have everything removed and a clean shoulder. Isn't that nice? All right.
So if you just had hand tools, would you use the router plane?
Yeah, I think you'd have to use some version of the router plane. But you'd have to set up parallel holds, obviously, to work the plane in. All right, so there you go. We've got that all set. Now I notice a little high spot right there. I can see a little bit of a high spot right here, so I'm just gonna find the grain direction here and just shear that off. Okay, that's all we need to do. Nothing fancy. All right, so now our leg's ready. Let's get our veneer ready. You have to make a judgment call on how tall you want that cuff, okay? If I made it lower, to me, one way you can do this is by just putting black, quite often I'll use electrical tape, like electrician's tape, and you can tape around and tape it all off, and it'll look like the finished cuff, and decide if you like it there, or you can move it up. Higher, I felt like I was getting too high, and lower, it almost looked like not enough. So I don't know how to explain it, but there's not a formula to it. It's more of an eyeball. For this one, I have, just if you want to get proportions, what I'm actually at here, the leg is 27 inches long, and I put a 3.5 inch long cuff at the bottom, if that means anything. All right, so let's get into prepping our veneer. I'm going to use a straight edge. I would like it square though, just so that when I cut my pieces, I know it will be true at the top. So I'm going to use this higher bodied square. It's got a thicker beam to it. The woodpecker's square. This is the
851.
Yeah. Anyway, holding it up there, it makes a great kind of fence. It being thicker, it gives me more to bear against than this. If you can also use just a straight edge or a piece of wood. I'm going to use my veneer saw, and holding down firmly, first I want to make some cuts here, just so I don't tear out too much at the end there. This is very fibrous wood, so it gives me a nice clean cut like that. Now, if you got a little fuzz under there, I can just hit it with my sandpaper just underneath. Now, that's my squared edge. So I want to mark it so I don't lose it. And so I just make a piece of chalk line across. Now I'll go ahead and measure down and get, let's just go 3 5/8. So we know we've got about an 1/8 inch longer than we need. And we'll cut it again. Okay. Okay, there we are. So there we have our cuff material. Now I want to cut it for width. I know my leg is 3/4 of an inch at the widest point. So all I have to do is use just a little straight edge, and I'll measure over 3/4 plus a 1/16, which is 13/16. For those of you following along at home. All right, so there we are, right there. 13/16, and we're just gonna lightly hit that. There we go. I would keep going like this, cutting enough material. I would need 12 of them to do a 4-leg table, but one's enough for now. So let's bring over our table leg. Now, we're going to be applying veneer and trimming and then applying the pieces around. So I would have all 4 legs prepped like this, and technically the order of application should be you're thinking about the overlap of the veneer on the corner. Now we're just talking about a 42nd of an inch. But if you didn't want to see the seam where it was overlapping from your front, you start in the back. So you go back, sides, and your front would be last. So the front, if you zoomed in on it, is laying over the veneer on the sides. So the seams are on the sides, all right? Now, if you don't do it in that order with this, it's probably okay, because it's only a 42nd of an inch, and you can break the edge at the end and you don't really see it. But if you're purist about this, this is the order you want to go in. So I'm just going to put a piece on the inside here. Here's my chalk mark. That's how I cut it. Do a little test fit. That looks nice.
I think you said 12, but you meant 16, right?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I meant 16. Thank you.
Unless Bill says it's a 3-legged table.
You're right. I was not in the 4-sided legs. Thank you. All right. So I would get all my tape out from all my legs here. All right. So I'm going to get some glue in here. Just going to use some Type Bond 3. That looks like enough. And then I got to brush it on. You want to be careful about this. Make sure you get it right up into under the collar edge there. Try not to make a mess. I'm trying not to make a mess, I'm saying. Get it out to the edges, because you want to make sure it's definitely on there. That looks good. Enough glue. That's good. Now I'm going to just bring my piece in. The key here is that you get it nice and tight to the top. So I usually bring it back and push it up. So I get a little glue squeeze out there. And I'm overlapping nicely on both sides. And now, with that pulled up there, I'm going to take the tape, stick it on the veneer, and now just pull it a little bit, just to give some tension to keep that tight up to the shoulder. There I am. I've got it all there. Now I just need some kind of block. I'm going to use this block with a little protective. You could put packing tape on here. This just has shrink wrap on there. Pop it on. I'm going to just put these strong little hand clamps on there. You could use any quick grips or anything that applies enough pressure. So I'm getting a little squeeze out at the end. That's nice. Because it's just veneer, it's not, you don't need a tremendous amount of pressure, but you can see over here I've got a nice little squeeze out of glue. So that's good. And that's it. I would go ahead and I would hit all 4 legs quickly like that. And then I would come back around, and once you've hit, you just keep adding to the sides until you get to the point where you've got the second to last piece on. So this is the 3rd piece. I did the first, and then the second, and the third, and there's how the tape was on there. So I got a nice joint, but see how it's overhanging? So we're going to trim that off and put on our last piece. So let's lay it down. Now, it's kind of hard to get the veneer saw in there, and it's glued nicely on the surface. So I'm going to just use my marking knife. You could use a scalpel here too. Marking knife has a good flat back, so I just use it right flat against the leg, and then lightly score. Make a couple passes here. I don't want to, because it's glued on the other side, it's not as much chance it's going to fracture under there. But then I can flip my knife over. Let me show you this side. And I'm going to just hold it again flat against there. There it is. Nice and clean, both sides. Oops. Right up to it. Now in the end, I'm overhanging that 1/8 of an inch. So rather than try to cut that, which would be, want to fracture a little, this is a good place to just use your chisel, sharp chisel, and lean on it. And just trim it flush. You got to have it flat to the leg. Well, you have to do it twice.
Nice.
All right, so there you go. We've just got, this is going to complete the cuff. 3 sides, last side to go. Let's go ahead and just throw this on. Show you how fast it goes.
I remember that you did a piece that had metal feet like this.
Metal?
Remember? Or am I remembering wrong that you had?
Did I?
Not like this, I'm sorry. It was a more fancy silver, more like claw feet, I think.
Yeah.
Those must have come fabricated, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, there's all different ways of terminating
feet. Hear
feet.
that too. I have a question from John. How you would, if this was metal, how you would?
Well, it depends. The prefab type that I think I've used a lot of have been like lion paw or smooth, and they'd have wheels on them too, and they come with hardware like screws. But if I made my own cap, I would epoxy it on, and just if it fit right on there, and so you'd have a smaller tenon, but it would fit right in the socket usually. But you had to offset it. When Garrett was here, he talked about some that he had made or made himself, I think. Pretty cool. So you had to offset the thickness of the metal, break the corners because inside it was rounded, and just get it to fit right snug up there to that shoulder. Wow. All right, so I've got another piece here. just going to set it in there, slide
You see,
it right up.
Contact glue being a potential use for this.
So messy for this application. It's too messy and too much of a hassle for a little glue up job like this. You know, waiting for it. This is so small that it really wouldn't be the best glue.
But it would work.
Yeah, it probably could work, but you're gonna pull your hair out. It's kind of crazy. I mean, hard to use.
Carla's saying, how do you keep the veneer from splintering or peeling off when the table is dragged across the floor?
Oh, right. That's all how you treat it at the end. You're going to break the bottom edges hard. I was going to talk about that in a second. So that the veneer isn't touching the floor. That's the key. So I've got these two front legs. Let's go ahead and just finish this one up. This one I'm going to trim. This is all wrapped around like that one. We just put the fourth piece on. Let's trim this off and we'll finish it up. So we'll just use our knife again. Could also use the saw because we have the saw I like because it's not influenced by the grain. Like when you take a knife into really grainy fibrous wood like this, it wants to track off. However, when it's glued to the surface, it's only going to track away. It won't track under because it's already glued. So I'm comfortable using the knife here as well. But that's why veneer saws have the advantage over knives. Now I'm going to come to the end again. And let's just get a good chop. All right, so I'm going to just trim this one as well. Actually, that's all set. So if I have anything to card scrape, I can scrape off a little glue this way. All right, so I'm gonna use some 150 right now to get this flush with the leg. Oh, that's nice. It's gonna be a good color. I do it over here, but I want to hang it over the edge and break those corners. I'll put a little color on that. No one's going to see that down there. But you got to be kind of aggressive here because you don't want the veneer to grab on the floor. So you really kind of knock that off good, okay? So you get a good kind of roundedness to it. And when it's on the floor, you never see it, and it looks like an older leg anyway. That's how they get kind of beat. And there we go. Let me just hit this one, and we'll see what it looks like. Now on tables that have cuff feet, a lot of times I like to add a line to the bottom of the apron. It is complementary to what's happening at the bottom. So I'm going to break the edges too, just kind of diagonally here lightly. Then I hit the foot.
You mentioned you're going to color the bottom, Tom?
You could if that was a problem, yeah. If you wanted to darken it, like I did on one of these here. Like this one, oh no, that's not it. One of them I hit with a touch of stain, but if you wanted to make it look fully like it was that material. All right, so there's my two legs that are done for this. Now the apron, I went ahead while we were set up over there on the router table, and I took the apron and I moved the fence over so only 3/16 of the cutter was exposed. And I ran this face down to create a little tiny rabbet. And I put a piece of veneer in there. And there's my car scraper. It's still a little proud right here. So I'm going to take my card scraper. Let me find a good corner. I should have sharpened it before. This feels pretty good here, though. I'm just going to pull this up and bring that into plane with the apron. That feels good. Then I would, of course, sand it. Use probably some 220, and I'd lightly break the edge. I already hand plane with a little block plane, got it flush, and trim the edges with the Japanese saw so everything's nice. And then we go into our simple table, our once simple table, one side and then the other. But there you see the effect. Now we've got this sweet line here under the apron and the feet are cuffed. Let's take a look at how it compares to our non-dress shoed table. I've got a little paint thinner here. This will help us to see how it's going to look. So let's put a little on the front of both of them. This is the nice typical cherry color. And this will have a nice clean, typical simple table. Nice honest little table. And classic cherry color initially. Now let's go ahead and put some on our new table with our cuff feet. And let's see how this looks up here. Pretty sweet line there, huh? So there you have, like, it's just a more sophisticated look, but it brings this simple table just up a notch to a kind of, it's still not a formal table, it just has more of a contemporary designer look. So let's just pull this over so you can see the two tables. So there you have it, a crash course in applying a veneer cuff to a solid leg. If you enjoyed this content, please consider subscribing, like, and share. And remember, head on over to epicwoodworking.com. If you get on the mailing list, that's how you hear about what we got going on. You can move to the neighborhood and be on the insider, all kinds of neat features of that. One of the fun ones is the forum on the website, and we were just talking about different veneer sources, and so you have veneer supplies online was commented upon as being a good source. They have not, I think they do have veneers, but they're better for all the kinds of accessories for veneering, and there's a lot of great information on that page as well. Daryl Keel that I mentioned earlier from Veneer Pressing Systems in Maine. They have some great vacuum pressing, and they have the glues and a lot of good information there as well. But certainly wood is one of the main veneer sources I know. All right, everyone, thank you so much for this for being with us for this crash course in making cuffed feet.